My husband asked me to kick out my dying son and said he was a burden, and that was the moment my entire reality shifted. When my son Ethan was diagnosed with leukemia at 24, Dr. Harris explained that treatment would be long, brutal, and exhausting. Ethan moved back home because he had no other option. I thought my husband Mark would understand, but instead, he started complaining almost immediately. He said Ethan was an adult and needed to handle his own problem, that he hadn't signed up to live with my grown child. The house had belonged to me and my late husband, but Mark treated it like his territory, and Ethan like an intruder. He kept saying this was supposed to be our fresh start, not a place to care for a sick son. Mark's behavior quickly turned cruel. He would cook dinner for just the two of us and announced there wasn't enough food for Ethan. On days when chemo left Ethan too weak to stand, Mark would snap that I wasn't his servant and that Ethan still had working hands. He blasted music early every morning, even though Ethan was nauseous and needed sleep. When I asked him to be quiet, Mark said he wasn't changing his routine because my adult son couldn't cope with real life. Laura, the home health nurse, noticed the tension immediately and started scheduling visits when Mark was usually out, just to keep things calm. After treatments, things got worse. Mark complained about seeing medical equipment in the house and made gagging noises whenever Ethan threw up. He sprayed air freshener directly toward Ethan and said the smell ruined his appetite. When Ethan lost his hair, Mark left a cheap hat on his bed with the word freeloader stitched across it. When I confronted him, he laughed and said it was just a joke meant to lighten the mood. Not long after that, he suggested Ethan should start paying rent, insisting free housing didn't teach responsibility. Even Dr. Harris and his husband Ben, a social worker, warned me that stress like this could seriously affect Ethan's recovery. Mark didn't stop there. He left apartment listings on Ethan's bed and circled help wanted ads, taping them to his door. He talked about friends whose kids owned houses and said some children were raised to achieve while others expected handout. When Ethan's white blood cell count dropped dangerously low, Dr. Harris warned us he had to avoid germs at all costs. Mark ignored it and invited his poker buddies over anyway. The house filled with smoke and coughing. When I begged him to cancel, he said it was his house too and he wasn't going to stop living because my son had a weak immune system. Ethan ended up in the ICU with a serious infection that nearly killed him. While I sat beside his bed, terrified and exhausted, Mark told me this was a sign. He said maybe it was time to look into long-term care facilities and handed me brochures for nursing homes. He claimed trained professionals would be better for everyone. That was when I remembered something crucial. The house hadn't just been left to me. My late husband had specifically willed it to me and Ethan together, ensuring his son would always have a home. I had never put Mark on the deed. I called my brother-in-law David, a real estate attorney, and asked him to review everything. The paperwork was clear. Ethan legally owned half the house, and Mark had no claim at all. I also met with Linda, a financial advisor who specialized in separation, to make sure Ethan and I were protected. When Ethan finally came home, his close friend Chloe moved in to help with daily care. That same week, our neighbor Travis mentioned seeing Mark drive by slowly, like he was still checking the place. Mark showed up one evening with more apartment listing, talking about disability access and government assistance. That was when I told him to pack his thing. He laughed, saying I wouldn't choose my freeloading son over my husband. I showed him the deed and told him the truth. The house belonged to me and Ethan. He owned nothing there. David arrived shortly after with eviction papers, explaining Mark had no legal right. Mark cried and begged, listing groceries he'd paid for and repairs he'd done, asking where he was supposed to go. Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady, and said he'd already fought hard enough just to stay alive, and he wasn't losing his home too.